majority of the industry relies on this data called ADS-B. So this data is super important. It's critical infrastructure for aviation. And what we're doing now with the new hardware is also allowing people to track drones, because the drone industry is growing rapidly. Strictly like the data sales, like the ADS-B data market is 22 billion. And then you obviously have aviation, which is 6 trillion. But then you add on the drone industry, and we're not even talking about all the products that are being built with this data. That expands it quite a bit. But right now we're focusing mainly on data collection and data sales. What's up?
Hey, Robin.
Man.
Good, man. How are you guys?
Good. Sal's got some explaining to do about his appearance, so I'll let him get onto it.
Yeah. I was kind of like, okay.
Yes, I'm calling from my Vision Pros. I found it's more convenient than setting up the camera and everything else while traveling, so here I am.
That's awesome. How do you like them?
I love them. I use them like literally 5 hours a day for work.
Really?
Yeah, the multitask.
Yeah.
Well, crypto VC is like the perfect job for people with like 2-second attention spans, and so now I have screens everywhere, all around me at all times. So it helps with the context switching.
Yeah, that's pretty. I've been thinking like hardcore about getting some. I just haven't done it yet. So I just don't know what people think about them.
Yeah, I think most people get tired of the they're still like pretty heavy. The battery is not great. The apps, there's like no apps, and the developer tools are absolute garbage. But still, spatial computing, just like the lower mental context to like switching things and just like treating it visually makes a huge difference in just like productivity, in my opinion.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
Yeah, I tried his out in person. They were pretty cool for sure. I don't know if I could wear them 5 hours a day for work. I mean, you probably just get used to them, but having everything kind of like in front of you and around you is really cool from like even like a work perspective. And the dinosaur game is pretty cool too.
Yeah, I'll try them one day. I hope. We'll see.
Cool. Well, I like the vest. Wingbits branded. That's super cool.
We can finally get some swag. We ordered a bunch of hoodies and T-shirts, and I got some vests and some. Yeah, it was time to get some stuff now when we got the new logo, so we can finally order some things.
Love it. I mean, Arc'teryx is top tier swag for sure. That's like an elite winter sports brand, right? So
maybe I'm pretending to be VC for a little bit wearing a vest.
Exactly. Yeah. Robin, have you done any of the conferences recently? Were you in Singapore, or are you going to Thailand or anything like that?
No. So we've expanded the team a lot lately. This is kind of like not going in the podcast because no one knows, but we're in the middle of a funding round.
Gotcha.
So that's going to finish probably within the next 4 weeks. And next year, we should be in a much better position to actually have time to attend some of these events.
Nice. Yeah, just like kind of heads down building right now. I think it makes...
Yeah, it's just so much to do, man. So we're just like, hardware launching Monday with Geodnet. The pre-orders open up. A lot of firmware work on the GeoSigner security dongle, as well as, on the Geodnet devices. So it's been a lot, and we onboarded, I think we're 15 people now, so it's been quite chaotic keeping track of everything. I have a marketing team now, like 4 people. Gotta figure that out. This is a lot.
No, that's awesome. Well, yeah, let's jump into it. I know we've got like 30 minutes here. Maybe that's a good place to start off. Is the marketing team the one that's making those cool kind of heat map plane path visuals that I see on Twitter? I think that's a great, like, easy kind of content for your account to put out that I enjoy checking in on.
No, that's actually it's been me and Alex. So I'm not a developer, but one of our senior devs made me a script so I can pull data from specific locations and specific ways. So it's pretty easy. So it's pretty cool making these visualizations. Right now we're working on one visualization essentially across the whole world, showing the airport coverage all across the world, all the gates. We have such good coverage on a lot of airports. You see what gates the planes park, multiple runway takeoffs, and how they kind of sometimes go into a holding pattern before landing. So for example, in London, they only have 2 runways on Heathrow, so every plane has to circle down while it lowers altitude. So it's really interesting to see all that.
That's wild. I feel like they should build more runways or something.
Yeah, it's just, I guess it's kind of packed there.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe let's take the perspective of someone who's never heard about Wingbits before. maybe isn't even super crypto native. I would just love to hear from you about what Wingbits is, why they should care, what kind of data it's producing, how that's valuable, kind of all that from a high level.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so how the aviation industry works, just to break it down a little bit, it's obviously a big industry, about $6 trillion, but majority of the industry relies on this data called ADSB to essentially run all the tools and the operations. And this data is already being crowdsourced. So you have hundreds of thousands of flight enthusiasts all around the world already hosting antennas, capturing this radio signal that the planes have to transmit. It's a regulated data point. And when you aggregate all that data from across the world, you get a perfect overview of airspace. And then this data is used from simple analytics tools to see like what airlines, how they're performing on essentially like estimated time of arrival. Do they leave on time? How much time do they spend at specific airports? Asset management and insurance perspective. They essentially try to estimate what's the exposure based on having X amount of planes on the ground at a specific airport. Logistics providers that use air freight need the data to monitor where are the goods. A lot of financial institutions, they buy the data and run different analysis on it, try to forecast what's about to happen. Consumer-facing insurance purposes, like if you have a delayed flight and you feel like you deserve a refund, well, how do they determine when it landed? Well, they look at this data because there's a specific point in the data that says like wheels down or wheels up. And then now, because what happened is that US regulated the data 2020. So after that took place, you now have pretty much every plane on Earth transmitting this data. So you can complete way more, you can make way more complete data sets. So that allows for way more advanced use cases. So now it's used a lot to essentially try to build flight delay prediction models. Just flight delays cost the industry over 70 billion a couple of years ago. So if someone can solve that, essentially, reduce that a bit, it's a pretty big market. So it's an infinite amount of use cases, and it's just growing. It's been growing exponentially since 2020. So that's kind of how it works. So this data is super important. It's critical infrastructure for aviation. And what we're doing now with the new hardware is also allowing people to track drones, because the drone industry is growing rapidly. It's not mature yet, but drones will add increased congestion and complexity to airspace. So someone will have to provide that infrastructure, and that's where we come in. We feel like we can do that in a more efficient and way more secure way than the existing players.
For sure. I'm assuming maybe helicopters too. Do they emit similar data?
Yeah, so actually most helicopters, some do the ADSB signal, but a lot of helicopters still transmit a signal called Mode S. And essentially it's a similar radio signal, but it doesn't have granular information. So what you need to do with that one is you need to essentially capture it with multiple antennas, and then you can triangulate the position. So that's really important. And that's why we now on the hardware is adding like a proof of location, because if you don't have the exact location, obviously those calculations are going to be inaccurate. And that's super important later on. Imagine you have an ambulance helicopter flying, and then you have drones flying in the U space, the air highways. They kind of need to know where they are to avoid collisions. So Definitely. In the future, this is going to be crucial.
Gotcha. And do you have a sense of, I guess, how big the flight data market specifically is today, like versus aviation largely?
Yeah. So the strictly like the data sales, like the ADSB data market is 22 billion. And then you obviously have aviation, which is 6 trillion. But then you add on the drone industry and and we're not even talking about all the products that are being built with this data. That expands it quite a bit. But right now we're focusing mainly on data collection and data sales.
Gotcha. So 22 billion. And I mean, would you say the majority of that data is actually, gathered or put together by basically volunteers, or are there companies that are being paid that are also, spending money to receive that data?
I mean, it's a really small fraction is captured, by airports or specific companies for it, but that's for specific purposes. You do have airports that set up way more advanced ADSB tracking stations, mainly from a security and certification point of view. But like 99.5% of all this data is volunteer data, and that's still the data that the industry relies on.
That's crazy. It's like this pretty large industry. that is.
And no one get it, because like an airport has a radar. It has about a 30-minute range. An airport has no clue what's going on outside 30 minutes. They use this data to figure out what's going on.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm sure they only like have data about what's kind of locally going on close to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, they share insights with other airports and stuff, but like if you see something on a radar, you don't know what plane it is, like you don't know the granular details of the plane. It's just kind of a blip. So you have to manually essentially contact that plane to figure out what's going on. So ADS-B data is just giving you much more granular insights. And the FAA is actually planning to replace radar over time with ADS-B because it's much more accurate, and it would allow you to essentially pack the airspace with more planes, which is going to be needed in the future.
Yeah, and that's definitely like a regulatory tailwind for you guys, I would say. Kind of regulatory, like technological tailwind, both.
Yeah. I think that's a big tailwind, and then where the industry is moving in terms of complexity and there needing to be better infrastructure is definitely another good thing for us.
Definitely, yeah. So flight data market, 22 billion, probably 99% of that data is contributed for free. What kind of gaps exist in that data set, or like how much better could it be, right? If there was like a token incentivized model like you all plan to have, and there was just more people contributing more data.
So I think a few things. So one is obviously on the most easy one to kind of grasp is the coverage. One, because all the other networks struggle in similar areas, like South America, Africa, parts of Asia, Middle East. Those are not very well covered by the other networks. It's very hard to grow there. But if you look at the traditional model where you rely on a volunteer to just be interested enough to deploy, you kind of just in a position where you have to sit and wait, versus if you can actually incentivize in different ways, maybe like a payback scheme on the hardware, maybe like higher token earnings for time or bounty areas and so on. That makes it easier for us to grow in terms of coverage. We can also better spread the coverage because you don't need 1,000 antennas in one city. You just get 1,000 duplicates. Mm-hmm. So by incentivizing properly, you can get a wider spread with enough redundancy, which makes the networks way more efficient. But then if you look at the security side, the existing networks, it's a Raspberry Pi, but there's no proof of location. It's self-reported. They have no cryptographic chip, so they cannot validate that this data is coming from an actual device or is being pushed from a server somewhere. And spoof data and GPS jamming is becoming an increasingly big problem. And that's really where we can come in and counteract some of that. I mean, GPS jamming is still going to be jammed. But if you spoof data, at least we have a better idea of, okay, well, if we triangulate from specific devices, we can say, okay, it says it's over here, but we can actually show you that it's actually in this area. So, and being able to provide a data stream to a customer where you say, look, like there's no spoofed or there's no fake data being pushed into this data stream, that's a pretty big deal.
Right. Well, yeah. So there's actually a couple, reasons for the token incentive, right? It's like fill coverage gaps, but it's also like, provide more verifiable coverage and also provide more efficient coverage in the sense that you don't need 1,000 antennas in 1 square mile radius.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a clear incentive, you have a much more optimized network because there's a reason for people to try to optimize their setup, maybe put it higher up, install multiple locations, sending locations to hosts across the world. If you have a binary reward like the existing networks where all you get is access to the platform, whether the antenna is good or bad, you're probably going to take the path of least resistance, put it in your living room or by your computer, you get access and that's it. So that creates, on average, a very unoptimized stations even though the network is large.
Yeah, incentives run the world, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about the kind of current state of the network and also hardware. So maybe, you mentioned Raspberry Pi, but maybe if you could take us through like the device or devices that are kind of your supply side, what they cost. If you're looking to tap into kind of the latent, nodes or stations that are out there, or are you trying to incentivize net new purchases of hardware, kind of all that stuff?
Yeah, so on the hardware first, so we started with a similar model as the other networks. So we did start with a Raspberry Pi based model with the difference that you have to secure your device with a geosigner dongle. So essentially it includes the GPS module and the cryptographic chip. And we decided on that path because, it's a better way to get going. A lot of people could repurpose, old helium miners and pretty much any Pi-based system. We will close the kind of so-called build your own device onboarding after this week. On October 14th, so Monday next week, we're opening for pre-orders of our new custom-made devices. They're manufactured by HiFix, and it's a partnership with Geodnet. So we don't manufacture or sell the devices, but they're made for us. We will have a standalone Wingbits miner. It will at opening, it will sell for $395, and then there will be a Wingbits Geodnet dual miner, which I believe is selling for $995. So that's kind of on the hardware side. Who we're trying to tap into is, right now, we're mainly focusing on the Web3 community, because if you look at the existing flight tracking community, most of them already share to all the other networks. Mm-hmm. So for us to add them on at this stage would not provide so much value to the customers, because they already get that data from the existing networks. So we're much better off targeting, essentially bringing new people into flight tracking. It's good for us, it's good for the industry, because the other networks are seeing a decline.
Right.
Later on in the future, we will be more targeting the flight tracking community as well. And to do that, we need to create more enhanced features on the platform that essentially is useful and beneficial for that crowd.
So kind of the same trade that exists now, where it's like you provide us your data and we'll give you access to the platform.
Yeah, I mean, they will still earn tokens, but the platform over time will obviously be much better than it is now. It's still, we launched November 2023. So over time, it's going to get a lot better. We're currently working on a lot of features. So they will come out over the course of this year. But we're not so focused on that now. That will be more of a long-term play.
For sure. And I have no experience setting up one of these devices, but I always love like playing around with hardware, getting it set up. How difficult is it to set up one of these devices? Like, how long would it take? Where would you need to put it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so if you do the existing devices, those are, it's a little more technical, because you do have to put together the antenna, the dongle, and the Raspberry Pi and run a script. It's not super difficult. We have super clear guides on our website. Location-wise, clear line of sight is kind of the name of the game. So the higher up you can put it, or the more like horizontal and vertical clear line of sight you can have, the better. Inside, we have some people hosting it inside, but you will see your coverage suffering a bit, which also will mean suffering rewards long term. Yeah. On the new device that's coming out, is a plug and play, super easy. You can plug it in power. If you want to do Ethernet, you can do that. If you want to do Wi-Fi, you can do that. But that same thing on location. You want to mount not the entire device, but the antenna portion of it. You want to mount it as high as you can, preferably up on the roof, or definitely outside on a balcony or something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. And how are you rewarding people right now? Is there a point system? Because the token's not live yet, right? So what does that look like from a contributor perspective?
Yeah, so we're in testnet right now, and we're rewarding everyone on Solana's DevNet. And essentially what we're envisioning is like, we're still going to iterate slightly on the rewards formula, because we've identified some things that we can do better. And then we'll run a recalculation when we updated the formula. But essentially what you earn in testnet will be retroactively rewarded in mainnet. So you're essentially accumulating tokens. They clearly just don't have any type of value right now, since they're testnet tokens.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. Sal, over to you to ask about the month of September and what's been going on.
Yeah, Robin, I grabbed drinks with Mike from Geodnet here in Salt Lake City yesterday, and he was at their booth with some of your guys' dual mining devices. I think it's super awesome what you guys are doing, and one of the most we've always had this line of like, hey, the first probably 5 or so years of DePIN are going to be about these single networks, and the true magic of DePIN is only going to be unlocked when we have interoperability between networks, when we see locations and assets and data being sort of like shared across it. So I think you guys have probably the best canonical example of how this drives value for the end users of the networks for both of your guys' projects. So super curious to hear more about it, how it came about, what is the actual end? I mean, I got to see it, but for folks listening on the call, what does the antenna look like, and hear more about the nature of the partnership.
Yeah, so how it kind of came about was we were first introduced through through our investor. They kind of connected us a while back. Really like Mike and the team at Geodnet. His background's super impressive. Built pretty cool stuff in the past. Clearly very good at what he's doing, both when it comes to hardware and RTK and all that stuff. So, but then we saw that we have really good synergies, both from point of view where the optimal setup location is pretty similar. You want open sky, you don't want too much interference. But also there's actually quite a bit of value in combining the two kind of project in terms of like the data product, because they have super accurate proof of location. There's use cases with airports where you could, for example, host these dual mining stations on an airport and give airport access to relying on that GPS for their self-driving vehicles, whereas we would simultaneously get coverage of the airport runways, which is super important for us. And then I think we have a similar view on how we're looking to build our project. At least what I'm thinking is, my background is now Web3. It's traditional Web2. Built a few companies. I want to build this for the long term. Both me and Alex want to show that, look, like we can build a solid, long-term, successful business, even though we have a Web3 aspect to it. Doesn't mean it's a scam, because I think overall there's still quite a poor view on Web3, and I think we need to show essentially the world that you can build a really solid business, and the Web3 aspect builds a lot of power, or brings a lot of power and value if you use it correctly. So I think we're aligned on values. I think we're aligned on what we're trying to do, but we also have great synergy in terms of what we can do with the product.
Absolutely. That's awesome to see. I'm excited to see the partnership in action. One other question I had for you on I guess a far out there question, but one of the things we think a lot about from first principles is like, if we could, today DePIN has to interoperate with a lot of the existing standards in order to serve customers and have the ecosystem. So you guys use ADSB. The RTK networks are like, there's a specific encoding by which satellites send signals to the ground, and you have to encode with that. I have gone through, I really like learning about these things. And so I've realized that like a lot of these standards are fairly inefficient. Like some of these were designed in, the 80s, 90s. Like they have a lot of, you would design them differently from the ground up, I think, knowing what you would know today about how these things are used in action. So I'm curious to ask you, like, do you think ADSB is going to be the thing in a decade that you guys are still scanning? Or do you think there's another form? Are there limitations to it that eventually means that we'll have some more sophisticated or flexible or like modular type of data infra for flight data?
Yeah, so we actually talked about this the other day. One thing to keep in mind with aviation, it moves very slow. So ADSB technology is super old. Like it's a radio signal. It's been used by the existing networks for 15 years already, and it's just now, became regulated. They're working on new versions of ADSB. So version 3 is being worked on. That one's going to include like turbulence indicators and weather conditions. So more data. The one kind of challenge with ADSB as the airspace gets more congested is that there's just too many planes crowding the space with the signals. So they're working on how to figure that out now. But when we talk to advisors and industry experts, it's going to be a really long time before aviation would move away from it. One, because it's taken a long time to get here. It works well for what they need it for, but also just because of the nature of the industry. So in a decade, most likely going to be here. Still in 2 or 3, I have no idea.
True. Yeah, I didn't think about the fact they could just, do a V2, a V3, add in more types of data, kind of like slowly evolve it over time.
Yeah, but it also works well because the range, like we can, a range of an antenna is like 200 kilometers each direction. So it's like, it's a lot of good things about it. But yeah, I'm sure in the far future there will be a different way of doing it. But I don't know yet.
Right. And let's talk about maybe supply side and demand side really quickly. So last time we spoke, which was maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I think you were at around 1,650 stations around the world. Curious where you're at now and what it's been like scaling to the current size on the supply side.
Yeah, so we're in terms of like how many registered spots we have, it's like almost 2,150 or 2,200. Usually there's a lag between registering and going live. So we're about 2,000 live. But still, it's still been organic. So we haven't done any marketing yet, but we have added on the marketing team. So we will start doing some marketing activities. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
And just what it's been like scaling to the current size.
I mean, it's been pretty smooth, honestly, but like the challenge for us is the data. We ingest like 6.5 billion updates per day now, so there's a lot of data. So we're spending a lot of time working on the data pipeline, and we're gonna start probably for some customers we need to filter down the data because if we send them 24 hours of data, so this is hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes, it's just not manageable. But we have Alex, like he's worked a long time with big data and large scale infrastructure and data systems. So we built a really robust backend. So from a customer point of view, we have an amazing product. So that's not really the issue. Now we're scaling up way faster. We've gone from adding about 6 to 7 stations a day to 20 plus.
Nice.
So I think more of the challenge will come as the community grows quickly and be able to support them in a really good way as they scale. So we're going to add on some more community managers and ambassadors, create ambassador programs and that sort of thing to essentially help out the community in a better way. I think that's where the challenge is going to be.
Gotcha. And so you said you're at around 2,000 kind of live stations right now. I think you also might have said a 200-kilometer range, but I'm curious to get a sense of maybe how many non-Wingbits stations are out there, or how many stations would you like to see on the Wingbits network to have, mostly global kind of complete coverage? Just get a sense of that.
Yeah, so for us to reach global coverage, somewhere around 7,500 to 10,000 at most. Then you're still gonna have areas where you need more like granular coverage, maybe on specific airports. Maybe you need higher redundancy. But the existing networks, essentially there's about 35,000 antennas total out there, but they share data to pretty much all the networks. So all the networks share essentially the same network of antennas. But what happens is that, again, it's not spread optimally. So if they have massive clusters of antennas in specific, big cities, and that doesn't add any commercial value. They just have to discard a bunch of data or process a bunch of data because they get 1,000 duplicates. So it's not really the optimal way of doing it.
Not at all. Yeah. And I mean, I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear that you're only a 5x away from global coverage for the Wingbits network. I mean, that's like you said, you kind of just hired a marketing team. The token's not even live yet. You haven't really turned on the go-to-market or the incentives really even. And I think once you do that, you'll be able to reach that 10K, 7,500.
We think so too. Yeah, we think so too. And then obviously what we're spending time on now is making sure that the rewards model is as fair as it can be. Analyzing earnings. Obviously we don't know the value of a token, but we can see kind of the difference in earnings between different providers and different areas. So we're going to iterate a little bit there to make sure it's a little more balanced. So I think, it feels pretty good. I think we're on a good track.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then just want to wrap us up by talking about two quick things. So one is demand. Have you guys serviced any demand already, or are you not quite there yet? Just, what does the demand side look like?
No, so we already have revenue. Obviously, it's not not in the millions or anything, but we've onboarded a few customers that we work with for different use cases, and we have a pretty strong pipeline of customers, and we have pretty clear KPIs of where we need to reach in terms of coverage to execute on the various customers in the pipeline. So that's why our main focus now is on the network growth, because we know when we grow the network, we know we can execute on the pipeline, which would obviously be good for everybody, and especially community, since we're going to feed revenue back into the community.
That is great. That's a beautiful problem to have, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
And then last thing is, just what can you tell us about mainnet launch, token launch, dates, chain, just any info you can share?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to have a mainnet launch late this year. We're still. It depends. We're not gonna launch mainnet if we see that it's not ready. Then we may push it a month or two. But that's the goal. So either late this year or early Q1 is the kind of the frame.
Cool. Well, that's exciting. Maybe a Christmas or New Year's Eve present for all of us in the DePIN community.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. I mean, I know the community is pretty excited about getting there, and we are too. But it's like we have a pretty big responsibility to making sure we do things right for them. They've been here for almost a year, many of them, and like we just want to do them treat them well.
Absolutely. Well, Robin, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? Anything you want to tell our audience in terms of how they can get involved or places they should find you guys on the internet?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best place, honestly, is joining our Discord. You can find the link either on our Twitter account or on our website. Got a super helpful community, great mods. And then, check out our new features. You can actually go in now and click all the taken hexagons to see what people earn and how much they cover. And I would highly encourage people before they join to kind of do a little bit of research there to see if it's a super saturated area, like make an educated decision on whether you should actually deploy there, spend the money on the hardware, or maybe try to find a host in an uncovered area.
Awesome. Well, yeah, everyone keep a lookout for Wingbits and what they're doing. Super cool to have you on and hear more about all the progress recently, and congrats on it too. Very excited for you guys to launch.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.